Long ago, in the heart of ancient Nigeria, two mighty kingdoms bordered each other, Iwoland and Oyoland. These neighboring realms had been bitter rivals for countless generations, constantly feuding over boundaries, resources, and pride. The roots of the feud stretched back centuries to an armed conflict over land and resources that had long been forgotten. But the fires of that ancient grudge still burned fiercely, stoked by ignorance, prejudice, and wounded pride on both sides. No opportunity for diplomacy or compromise could quell the animosity between Iwoland and Oyoland. The rulers of the two kingdoms perfectly embodied the long-standing rivalry. In Iwoland reigned King Akinwande, an arrogant and uncompromising monarch. He was utterly convinced that Oyoland posed a grave threat to his kingdom's security and sovereignty. His wife Queen Omosalewa harbored an even more intense hatred for their neighbors, constantly disparaging Oyoland and its people with racist vitriol. She made no attempt to conceal her deep disdain, allowing it to fuel further discord. Just across the border, the kingdom of Oyoland was governed by King Olawale, an equally stubborn and bellicose ruler. Matching his rival Akinwande's obdurate distrust of Iwoland, he doggedly refused to back down from any provocation, seeing any offer of diplomacy as weakness. At his side stood Queen Funmilayo, a fierce warrior queen who personified Oyoland's martial spirit. Her rallying cries inflamed her subjects against the supposed injustices of Iwoland at every turn. With such intransigent forces in power on both sides of the border, the centuries-old feud raged on unabated, with each perceived slight or territorial infraction prompting new cycles of retaliation. The list of grievances had grown so long and convoluted that neither side could remember what had started the conflict in the first place. All that remained was an endless perpetuation of hatred, mistrust, and a constant trampling of all possibilities for reconciliation. Into this seemingly hopeless quagmire of animosity were born two new potential heirs to the thrones, Prince Azubuike of Iwoland and Princess Adaku of Oyoland. As the children came of age, they each exhibited the noble qualities befitting future rulers groomed from birth to protect their kingdom's legacies at all costs. Azubuike grew into a brave and virtuous young man, already renowned for his skills as a warrior and his uncompromising sense of honor and duty. The quintessential gallant prince, his creature was muscular yet graceful, with a pair of soulful eyes that could both inspire troops to valor and melt a maiden's heart. More than his physical gifts, he possessed an unshakable moral compass and a kindness toward all people. In Oyoland, the beautiful Adaku blossomed into the epitome of a regal princess, well-read and intelligent beyond her years, with a gentle spirit and heart of pure compassion. She was a stunning beauty, with skin like burnished bronze and long-lashed eyes that shone with empathy and wisdom. Yet she tempered her looks with humility and grace. While trained in the martial arts of her kingdom, she rejected violence and embraced peace and cooperation as loftier ideals. Though raised in neighboring lands that had been indoctrinated for centuries to loathe each other as mortal enemies, Azubuike and Adaku's paths finally intersected purely by chance one fateful day. Their respective kingdoms had temporarily declared a truce to renegotiate border boundaries, allowing the young heirs to encounter each other for the first time. For both, it was love at first sight. When Azubuike first locked eyes with the luminous Adaku, he felt an intense magnetic pull toward her that was far beyond the physical. Here was a woman whose incandescent inner beauty equally matched her outer radiance. He saw in her eyes depths of kindness and compassion he had never witnessed, even in his own people. In that moment, his soldier's conditioning warned him she was the daughter of sworn enemies, but his heart instantly overruled all prejudice. Adaku herself was equally entranced by the striking, statuesque prince whose warm eyes seemed to reach straight into her soul. In his chiseled features, she recognized a gentle strength of character missing in so many of the warmongers she'd known in Oyoland. Looking beyond his royal paraments, she saw a pure, nurturing spirit struggling to operate in an arena of ceaseless conflict and hatred. In that first fateful meeting, she realized he was her destined soulmate. From then on, no amount of boundaries, borders, or long-standing feuds could separate the two young lovers. They began arranging clandestine meetings in the remote forest separating their two kingdoms, reuniting at a secluded glade to freely express their mutual affection. For Azubuike and Adaku, Those precious hours stolen away in their sheltered evergreen sanctuary offered an escape from the turmoil and violence that had marred their lands for generations. Here they could simply be themselves, two bright young people newly awakened to the wonders of love, free from the prejudices and hostilities that normally kept their peoples apart. They spent long afternoons romping through the idyllic glade, playfully frolicking with the butterflies and woodland creatures made unafraid by the lovers' gentle souls. By a tinkling brook shaded with weeping willows, they reclined to gaze into each other's eyes and share their innermost secrets, hopes and dreams of a future where peace and understanding might somehow replace the ignorance that had turned their families into sworn adversaries. As night fell over their private Eden, Azubuike and Adaku would settle beneath the canopy of stars, marveling at the infinite universes that dwarfed their earthly conflicts. In tender, hushed tones, they exchanged sacred vows of eternal love and devotion. They spoke of mystical forces greater than any person or kingdom, transcendent bonds of cosmic union that could never be constrained by the petty prejudices dividing their families. For the first time in their lives, the young lovers had found their complementary other halves, their predestined soulmates who could envision a higher existence beyond the mortal planes of hatred, vengeance, and political strife. Here in this woodland sanctuary, they were able to become beings of pure spirit, leaving their earthly trappings behind as they transcended to enlightened planes of unconditional love and acceptance. For those fleeting hours, they were truly free. But as intoxicating as these sylvan trysts were, Azubuike and Adaku could not remain sequestered forever. They knew their absences would eventually be noted by their watchful parents. And if their illicit romance was uncovered, it could potentially shatter the fragile truce between Iwoland and Oyoland, spark generations of unresolved conflict, and make them eternal exiles from their families. Still, no amount of risk or protestation from their families could dull the brilliance of the all-consuming love that had blossomed between the two star-crossed heirs. As each pale moon waxed and waned over their forest paradise, Azubuike and Adaku's passion for one another only burned brighter. Behind the high palace walls of Iwoland and Oyoland, however, dark forces were growing increasingly suspicious of the young couple's inexplicable absences and curious fraternization. Trusted scouts and spies dispatched to monitor the pair's movements began picking up the trail of their secret liaisons deep in the truce woodlands, discovering the remote glade where the lovers' spiritual force field was strongest. First with muted whispers and later frantic shouts, the news of the clandestine romance spread rapidly through the underworld of snitches and informants serving both realms. In time, the shocking rumors finally reached the incredulous ears of King Akinwande and King Olawale themselves. The once unthinkable notion that the heirs to their respective thrones could be betraying their eternal legacies of hatred in favor of each other's loving embrace was too horrifying for the monarchs to process. Both rulers immediately feared the absolute worst their offspring had been brainwashed, perhaps even abducted by supernatural forces conjured by the enemy kingdom in an insidious plot against them. King Akinwande became apoplectic, imagining his prized warrior son Azubuike in the clutches of that Jezebel temptress from Oyoland, who must have used her feminine wiles to bewitch him. Queen Omosalewa railed endlessly against the soulless harlot, whose very existence mocked everything she'd taught her only child about the evil heathens across the border. How could the future of their noble lineage have been so corrupted? In Oyoland, King Olawale flew into an equally incensed rage at the notion his beloved daughter Adaku might have been seduced by a member of the brutish, renegade Iwolanders. Queen Funmilayo whipped the court into a frenzy with inflammatory speeches about their virgin princess being soiled and perverted by the mongrel Akinwande had raised. Her precious offspring assuredly required rescue from whatever unholy coercion could blacken her virtue in such an unforgivable manner. Without an inkling of communication from their enthralled children, the rulers of Iwoland and Oyoland spun increasingly outlandish conspiracy theories explaining what dark supernatural forces must have possessed their heirs. Some whispered ancient curses cast from beyond the veil, while others spun tales of malevolent spirits from the underworld corrupting the young lovers' souls. The more belligerent factions demanded harsh retaliations and even preemptive invasions to save the princes from demonic possessions. As tensions reached a fevered peak, King Akinwande and King Olawale finally took drastic action. They issued an urgent summons for their children, demanding Azubuike and Adaku's immediate return from wherever corrupt forces had absconded with them. The missives made clear that non-compliance would be met with the harshest punitive measures up to and including imprisonment, banishment from their kingdoms, or worse. Though still deliriously entranced in the throes of true love, the clandestine notes entreating their presence pierced the idyllic veil surrounding their forest sanctuary. Some distant part of the young lovers' being still felt an ingrained sense of duty toward obeying their parents and rulers above all else. Trepidation churned their carefree spirits, weighted down by the sudden realization that their earthly bonds may not be so easy to transcend after all. As they solemnly prepared to return and face their families' wraths, Azubuike and Adaku clung to one final, desperate hope that the truth of their union might somehow shine bright enough to cut through the darkness of hatred, ignorance, and hostility shrouding the kingdoms. Perhaps by bearing the full intensity of their cosmic love connection, they could awaken their embittered parents to higher realms of consciousness. All they needed was understanding. With that flickering ember of optimism still aglow in their hearts, the young soulmates finally emerged from the woodlands they had claimed as their sanctuary. For likely the final time in their lives, they dared to hope their eternal embrace might somehow break the cycles of conflict that had divided Iwoland and Oyoland for centuries. Hand in hand, they strode into the bewildered palace courts that had questioned and scorned their clandestine love at every whisper. Now it was time for those bonds to speak for themselves. Yet even before the first words were spoken, something ancient and unyielding had already hardened the hearts of their ruling families against anything that challenged the status quo. It was here, in the respective courts of Iwoland and Oyoland, that Azubuike and Adaku would be forced to make their ultimate stand for true love against implacable forces more powerful than any they could fathom, threatening to shatter their transcendent union forever. When Azubuike and Adaku finally emerged from the secluded forest glade that had served as their romantic sanctuary, they were immediately descended upon by scores of palace guards and militiamen. The armed battalion forcibly took the stunned young lovers into custody and dragged them in chains before their wrathful families. In the regal throne room of Iwoland's court, King Akinwande and Queen Omosalewa sat stewing in contempt at the sight of their once noble son being hauled in like a treasonous criminal. Azubuike kept his head held high, refusing to show fear, but his heart sank seeing the frothing rage etched onto his parents' scowling faces. "Explain yourself," boy Akinwande bellowed upon his son's entry. "What sorcery has addled your senses to cavort with the beasts of Oyoland in unconscionable defiance of your kingdom and birthright?" Queen Omosalewa could barely make coherent sounds, so consumed with incredulous anger was she. "My own flesh, betraying all we've taught for the perverted lusts of that pagan harlot's spell." Realizing his rare chance to plead his case, Azubuike looked his furious parents square in the eyes, letting his unwavering conviction pour forth in earnest tones. "My king, my queen, the love I have found with the Princess Adaku is no spell or dark magic, but rather the purest force of cosmic energy your minds can scarcely comprehend. From the moment I gazed into her infinite depths of beauty and kindness, I understood we were destined to cross all planes of existence as eternal soulmates. Our bond transcends the earthly bounds of hatred you have imposed between our families based on events long forgotten." The young prince paused, letting his impassioned words sink in as he stood unafraid before the monarchs who had groomed him for a life of militant conquest. "You raised me to someday rule this kingdom with duty and honor above all," Azubuike proclaimed. "And it is my highest calling to be the conduit that can finally unite Iwoland and Oyoland in everlasting peace and harmony. For if two youths from ancestral enemy tribes can recognize the divine love connection we share, then the path is finally open for our peoples to leave behind eons of needless conflict." Queen Omosalewa shook her head in repugnant disbelief, while King Akinwande's face flushed with rage. "You speak nonsense, boy," the king roared. "The conniving Oyolanders have clearly corrupted your mind through sinister trickery. Assail your father and mother's legacy with these lies, and by the ancient codes of Iwoland there can be but one punishment: banishment." The words hung heavy in the throne room, seeming to rob Azubuike of his breath. His lifelong loyalty was being shredded in an instant by those who had taught him duty and discipline above all else. The crushing weight of reality slammed back into his psyche. No amount of enlightened truth could ever pierce such willful ignorance. In the neighboring realm, An equally bitter conflict played out when Adaku was brought in shackles before King Olawale and Queen Funmilayo in Oyoland's audience chamber. Adaku respectfully lowered her eyes before her furious parents, but retained her poised demeanor and gentle spirit. Inside, her hopeful flames were fading fast as she felt the seething hostility radiating from the monarch's scowls. "Daughter, is it true?" roared Olawale when he could withhold his outrage no longer. "We receive maddening reports that you have allowed yourself to become enthralled and debased by one of Iwoland's barbarians. Is this how you serve the honor of your legacy?" Funmilayo was already in a hissing frenzy, bellowing curses at the top of her lungs. The virginal heir to our throne, violated by the brutish spawn of our sworn blood enemies. We must appease the ancestors' spirits immediately before this defilement breeds unholy vengeance upon all of Oyoland. Before the accusations could escalate further, Adaku addressed her parents in a soft yet firm tone of compassion. "Mother, father, the connection I share with Prince Azubwike is one of pure, eternal love that exists on a higher astral plane than any Union concepts of enmity you can comprehend. From the moment I first beheld his glorious heart and noble spirit, I understood we were predestined spiritual partners fated to transform eons of hatred here into an enlightened new age of unity and coexistence between our peoples." Pausing briefly so her parents could digest her words, Adaku pressed on while retaining her serene poise. "This is not mere infatuation or disgraceful pagan lust as you suggest, but rather the divine forces of the cosmos revealing their immaculate plan to create everlasting peace. If the supposed barbarians you have been taught to loathe could produce such an evident soulmate for the heir of Oyoland, it is clear that our ancient prejudice is the true corrupting wickedness we must overcome. And what higher purpose exists for power than to shepherd our people into an enlightened new era of transcendent understanding?" King Olawale simply shook his head in disbelief, too enraged by what he saw as his daughter's utter betrayal to formulate a measured response. Queen Funmilayo, however, had heard more than enough. "You foolish, insolent child," she bellowed. "Have the degenerate lusts of that Iwolander whelp blinded you entirely to the solemn oaths and traditions of our ancestral line? Our people's hatred stretches back through the churning mills of eternity, with the spilled blood of hundreds anointing the seeds. Your very existence is all that stands between our warrior nation and vengeful obliteration by those wretches. Yet you surrender our posterity with scornful blasphemies of peace and cosmic soulmates. The utter ramblings of one held hostage and broken by enemy vices." The shrill echoes of Queen Funmilayo's tirade bounced off the chamber walls for some time before she finally turned to jeer husband, eyes agleam with venomous determination. "My liege, we must act swiftly to purify the corrupted seed from our family's noble tree. Only harshest punishment can restore dignity before our defiled dynasty's honor is lost eternally." King Olawale took a long, withering gaze at his dejected daughter before sighing deeply and upholding ancient protocols. "So be it. Adaku, unrepentant issue of treasonous filth, is hereby sentenced to a dishonorable death unless she renounces all unholy bonds with the Iwolanders before first light." Guards swiftly swarmed to seize the heartbroken princess and drag her away to await her grim decree. Adaku offered no resistance, instead silently hoping against hope that her misguided parents might yet see her path of unconditional love was the sole true enlightenment. As the early evening shadows grew long over the two rival kingdoms, Prince Azubwike and Princess Adaku sat in isolated confinement on either side of the disputed border. Azubwike languished in a cramped, dingy cell within Iwoland's palace dungeons, while Adaku was remanded to a chilly, bare hut on the Oyoland palace grounds normally reserved for enemy prisoners of war. Despite the physical divide enforced upon them by their parents' decree, the metaphysical cords connecting the lovers' entwined spirits could never be severed. Over the course of that agonizing night, they continually called out to one another through their bonded energies, whispering words of devotion and solace against the impending death sentences looming at daybreak. Azubwike remained stoic yet resolute in his cell, channeling the warrior discipline instilled by years of rigorous Iwolander training as he repeated sacred vows of eternal love for his Adaku over and over. His soul burned with an unquenchable fervor, fueled by his intrinsic knowledge of the righteous path destiny had decreed for him and his transcendent soulmate. For her part, Adaku quietly shed crystalline tears of sorrow for her family's indignant ignorance, yet never wavered in her knowing that their love would ultimately illuminate the way to deliverance. In hushed tones reverberating across the corporeal dimensions separating her from Azubwike, she reciprocated her bold, beloved, sacred promises of apocalyptic devotion. "My Azubwike, prince of my celestial world, and the only shining truth this earthly realm has ever glimpsed," she spoke into the ether of their mystical bond. "No mortal edict, or even the cold finality of death, can ever rend our spirits apart. For we are not temporal beings bound by the pitiful trappings of hatred and fear as our ancestors were. We are infinite lovers, intertwining suns whose radiant union of cosmic energies is destined to breathe new light and life into this darkened realm. My Adaku, eternal goddess of illumination, hear me," Azubwike ardently replied through their soul connection. "Our inexorable forces cannot be limited or extinguished by the myopic rages of those who cannot escape physical shells to behold the true glory of what we are. We are immortal lovers who have burned with wavelengths of pure transcendence across every plane of existence in this universe and all others. Nothing less than shattering the barriers, separating all dimensions in a spectacular cataclysm of eternal light could ever hope to separate the essence of who we are." The doomed yet defiant couple maintained their impassioned cosmic outpourings throughout the night, clinging to their infinite faith that the morning light would awaken all to the ultimate truth they sought to spread. For as grim and final as their parents' judgment seemed, Azubwike and Adaku knew that no mortal punishment could extinguish the blinding forces of everlasting love binding their unshakable union. As the first pale rays pierced the pre-dawn sky above their lands, the young soulmates whispered one last invocation to the great cosmic symphonic consciousness from which all energy flows, entrusting their imminent physical expiration to manifesting the highest awakening for all. And in that fleeting instant before their fated moment arrived, Azubwike and Adaku felt a profound yet ineffable wave of elemental power sweep through their spirits, sealing their cosmic contract and activating an unfathomable rebirth. As the first orange rays of dawn crested over the horizon, Azubwike was roused from his modest cell by a contingent of grim-faced Iwolander guards. The burly soldiers said nothing as they bound the prince's wrists tightly with coarse rope, then shuffled him out to the palace courtyard where his destiny awaited. In the main square, King Akinwande and Queen Omosalewa sat mounted regally upon their thrones, their countenances stony and implacable. Gathered before them stood a regiment of the kingdom's most elite warriors, their razor-edged blades glinting in the morning light. At the foot of the dais knelt an executioner's block, freshly stained with the blood of recent treachery. Azubwike maintained a steady, defiant stride as the soldiers prodded him toward the grisly apparatus. He raised his chin high, letting his eyes meet his parents' sneering gazes as he passed. No hint of fear or remorse showed on the prince's face, only unshakable resolution. Just then, a clamor from the other side of the courtyard signaled the arrival of the Oyolander retinue. More armed escorts were ushering in the radiant Princess Adaku, hands bound but head held regally high. As she approached, Azubwike felt their soul connection blaze to incandescent intensity. Their eternal cosmic union was mere moments from igniting. With grim solemnity, the Iwolander guards forced Azubwike to his knees before the blood-stained execution block. The prince obliged gracefully, keeping his eyes locked on his beloved Adaku's across the courtyard. As his head was shoved down toward the gruesome chopping slab, he could no longer see her face, but their spiritual bond remained unbreakable. On the Oyolander side, Adaku was subjected to similar indignations. Obeying her guard's crude motions with noble poise, the princess elegantly lowered herself into a kneeling position before her executioner's block, its surface still slick with the remnants of past condemned souls. While their faces were turned away, the fated lovers sensed the movement of armored executioners, assuming positions to either side of them, cruel blades at the ready to sever young life from its earthly terrestrial existence. The time of ultimate sacrifice had come, with only eternal union as the destined afterlife. King Akinwande and King Olawale, mounted on opposing daisies, raised their jeweled scepters in tandem, signaling the blade's fatal descents. The gathered crowd of loyalists from both kingdoms collectively held its breath, while soldiers stood at disciplined attention. This barbaric act of condemned treason would solidify an unbroken coda of hatred spanning generations. But at the last possible instant before the executioners struck, Azubuike and Adaku found the strength for one final cry of devotion to echo through the cosmos. With every ounce of their beings, they channeled peals of eternal, undying, unconditional love across all levels of karmic existence, a rapturous hymn to the purifying truth of what destiny had decreed their union must become. "I am yours, and you are mine," Azubuike defiantly exclaimed through their interwoven consciousness, two atoms sharing a single nucleus for all eternity. "My love for you transcends the boundaries of all space and time," Adaku's spirit replied in soaring melodies that reverberated past any mortal constraints. "We are Azubuike and Adaku no more, and so much more." As these ecstatic proclamations rang out across the unseen spirit planes, a sudden shockwave of pure celestial energy exploded with the fury of a million sunbursts through the palace courtyards of both kingdoms. The executioners, with swords raised to kill Azubuike and Adaku, froze as the power of the lovers' devotion surrounded them. The condemned couple began rising into the air, their physical forms transforming into swirling clouds of brilliant cosmic energy. The armies that had been marching to battle watched in awe as their prince and princess became celestial beings before their eyes. All feelings of pride, hatred, and prejudice melted away in the presence of such pure, radiant truth. The forms of Azubuike and Adaku intertwined into beautiful, pulsing mandalas, endlessly combining into more intricate patterns manifesting the mathematics of perfect love. The once warring peoples were immersed in enlightenment, witnessing the mystical transcendence of flesh into divine union. As the brilliant climax was reached, the conjoined light of the twin souls blazed with the intensity of a billion newborn stars. The rulers who had started the conflict felt the weight of their anger and arrogance shattered by the beauty of these souls' rapture. They wept in awe of the unveiled mysteries. In that moment, everyone realized the futility of hatred, division, and prejudice. These toxic ways were obliterated by the presence of infinite, unconditional cosmic love. For an eternity, the former kingdoms were bathed in primordial unity and ultimate enlightenment emanating from Azubuike and Adaku.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.